Welcome. Let's just dive right into this fascinating explainer of our source material today. We're going to be looking at something that can completely shift our perspective from critical judgment to empathetic understanding. We're unpacking some really profound insights drawn from a recent morning reflection by Reverend Huzek, where he explores the teachings of John MacArthur. We're going to look at how we view others, why we so easily fall into the trap of harsh criticism, and how we can actually transform our daily interactions just by examining our own character first.
Now, do you ever absolutely dread facing a difficult boss or maybe an uncooperative subordinate on a Monday morning? We all face that kind of workplace friction, right? You wake up, you think about that one person, and you just brace yourself for impact. But what if, instead of just complaining about it, we use this exact scenario as the perfect starting point to examine our own character? It's a real challenge to look inward before we point outward.
Which brings us to Section 1, the wrongful judgment.
The whole foundation for this idea really comes from the book of Matthew, which says, "For in the same way you judge others, you will be judged, and with the measure you use, it will be measured to you." So the crucial takeaway here is that the exact standards and the exact measure we so aggressively apply to other people, well, they're ultimately going to be applied to us. If we're harsh, we're basically inviting harshness right back. If we're unforgiving, we are literally setting the benchmark for how we ourselves are going to be evaluated. It's a pretty sobering thought, isn't it? It just instantly levels the playing field.
And this leads us right into what the source material calls the Pharisee trap. You see, most of us mistakenly feel superior to others because we're judging them using our own flawed, man-made standards. We basically build a set of rules that we conveniently already excel at, and then we look down on everyone else who fails them. We completely forget that our little benchmarks are miles away from a truly perfect, holy standard, which is God's standard. We're just creating an illusion of righteousness based on a test we wrote ourselves.
And man, that flows right into this idea of the illusion of omniscience. When we insist on our absolute right to harshly judge someone else, we are essentially acting as an all-knowing judge. We're boldly out there claiming that we understand all the facts, all the circumstances, and even the deepest inner motives of that other person. But the reality? We just don't. And by claiming we do, we invite judgment upon ourselves using that same impossible standard of absolute wisdom. We are literally setting a trap for ourselves by pretending we know it all.
Moving on to Section 2, the psychology behind criticism. So this brings up a really critical question, one that forces us to break our usual outward focus and look right in the mirror. Why are we so quick to harshly judge the faults of others? Have you ever noticed that? How fast we are to point out a specific flaw in a coworker or someone in our community? Why is our radar so highly tuned to certain faults?
Well, the source reveals a really profound insight here, and it's called psychological projection. It turns out that our sharpest, quickest criticisms of other people are usually just a projection of our own deepest internal battles. The exact sins and internal struggles we are wrestling with the hardest in our private lives are often the very things we attack others for. Our judgment of them is actually just a giant spotlight shining right on our own secret struggles. Crazy, right?
Furthermore, our different roles naturally create conflicting viewpoints. Take a boss and a subordinate, for example. A boss often expects absolute control and obedience, so they view any pushback as insubordination. Meanwhile, the subordinate is sitting there viewing that exact same leadership as overly strict or nitpicking. These positional differences breed a totally false sense of superiority over one another. We judge from our own seat, completely failing to realize that the person across the desk is doing the exact same thing from theirs.
Let's dive into Section 3, the boomerang effect.
You see, harsh criticism doesn't just travel in a straight line, impacting only the person you aim it at. It actually has a boomerang effect. When we throw out this interpersonal judgment, it inevitably loops right back around to strike the person who threw it. The very cross we build for someone else is so often the one we end up having to carry ourselves.
To really ground this concept, the source points to the historical story of Haman from the book of Esther. Haman let his arrogance and hatred drive him to build a literal, lethal trap, a towering gallows for an innocent man named Mordecai. But because of the boomerang effect of his own malice, Haman was ultimately hanged on the very gallows he constructed. It's the ultimate, vivid example of judgment returning straight to the sender.
All right, Section 4, consistent character.
We can actually draw some great real-world inspiration here from the late Charles Cow.
He was the founder of Commonwealth and Global Views magazines, a towering, highly respected cultural and publishing figure who passed away at the age of 90. He left behind this massive professional legacy, but, that's not actually what made him so deeply revered.
Instead of focusing on his public accolades or his wealth, the source highlights that the absolute most satisfying praise Cal received was this simple testament from his own child. They said, "My father was the same at home and outside. He wasn't putting on some grand show for the public while being a tyrant behind closed doors. He had absolute consistency in his character."
And this really highlights the ultimate contrast we all have to navigate. We live in a world that is just obsessed with on-stage ability, right? Public performance, power, job titles. But true, lasting respect, that is earned off-stage. It's built on private integrity, grace, and consistency. When the lights finally go down and all the fancy titles are stripped away, it is your underlying character that determines if people genuinely respect you or if they merely tolerate you.
Which brings us to our final part, Section 5, Work and Life Application.
I want you to think about the numbers 50 to 60. This represents the years of seniority a veteran community member might have. The source notes that this immense seniority so often leads to an arrogant, self-righteous correction of novice members. The veteran thinks, "Hey, I've been here for half a century. Who are you to do things differently?" And this creates massive friction because the veteran is demanding compliance rather than offering grace. They're shutting down newer members simply because they don't do things the veteran's exact way.
So how do we break this destructive cycle? Well, the source outlines these incredibly clear steps for internal preparation before you ever open your mouth to address a subordinate or a newer member. Step 1, reflect inwardly via faith. Don't just gather facts to punish someone. Step 2, pray for alignment with God's will. Seek alignment with a higher, graceful purpose. And finally, step 3, only then communicate with a gentle tone and purely constructive feedback. It is all about internal preparation before external correction.
Whether you have authority at work or maybe in a community organization, applying these principles is exactly how you achieve effective conflict resolution. Do not use your feedback just to punish people. Respect leadership authority and boundaries. Balance reason and rules with genuine empathy. And please, avoid those hot-headed reactions. When you do this, you actually lead people out of the dark and into better understanding rather than just sparking more conflict.
So we want to leave you with this final provocative thought to ponder as you start your week. Look at your own interactions. Are your daily criticisms actually guiding others toward the light? Or are they just a boomerang waiting to strike? I invite you to really reflect deeply on the true impact of your judgment today.